So we're going to have a pattern for the next, 6 or 8 talks, where we're going to begin by talking about a topic or an idea, and then we're going to look at a case study that's a good example of how that idea gets played out. So in the last couple of talks, we looked at the whole idea of neuroplasticity, how we shape our brain, and we read the Norman Doidge chapter from Norman Doidge's book, The Brain That Changes Itself. And so today we're following up on that idea of neuroplasticity with a case study of a really remarkable woman named Temple Grandin, who did an extraordinary job of shaping her brain, an unusual brain, to become a very creative brain and enabling her to be a really great creative problem solver. So we also are going to, in this talk, expand a little bit on something else we talked about several talks back, which is this notion of mentorship, one of our 10 new terms. And in that talk, when we were discussing the case study of Jane Goodall, we were looking at mentorship in a very, very professional sense, where she is being mentored in her field by people who are experts in her field. And that made an enormous difference for Jane Goodall. We're going to be looking also at mentorship in the case of Temple Grandin. That was a very, very important factor for her. But this is a mentorship that's more at a personal level, that is looking at how family, friends, teachers, people you have personal contact with in your life, how they become mentors. And we're here doing this talk at the Student Services building on the campus, because in this building there is a program that UT has that encourages mentorship and actually gives you an opportunity to get a mentor if you would like one. The program is called Horns Helping Horns, and it is faculty, students, staff. Sometimes it's upperclassmen students mentoring younger students. Sometimes it's staff mentoring students. Sometimes it's students mentoring kids off campus. Sometimes it's faculty mentoring students. It's all kinds of mentoring. But if you're interested in that kind of personal mentoring, Horns Helping Horns is a really excellent program to look into. So let's talk about this woman, Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin is an autistic woman. She was born with autism. And we're going to talk just a few minutes here about this condition of autism. It is a brain condition, so that you're born with a brain that's different from a normal brain. And it really is there are issues in the cerebellum of the brain, in the limbic system of the brain, and also in the frontal cortex. And the frontal cortex is where we normally think of creativity or conceptual thinking occurring. And there are issues in autism with that frontal cortex. So from a very, very early age, this is a real problem for Temple Grandin and for her family. So one of the things that is a symptom of autism is it's very difficult to acquire speech. There is a disability in terms of hearing speech, and it's not an auditory disability, it's not your ears. It's the part of the brain that deals with hearing is tangled, to use one of the words that Temple Grandin's fond of describing her brain. So it's difficult often for little kids to learn language. And in fact, Temple Grandin didn't speak until she was 3.5 years old. She basically was just silent. Most little kids start babbling when they're a little over 1 year old. And by 1.5 years, they've got a couple of hundred words. And by the time they're 2, they're just babbling like crazy. You may not be able to understand them, but they're talking a lot. Well, Temple Grandin was 3.5 years old, and she still wasn't talking. And that's because the part of her brain that would acquire speech had a disability in that part of her brain. And so one of the things that her family did was right at the beginning, they addressed this issue and they rewired her brain to be able to acquire speech. And this is just a remarkable story of her mother in particular. Her mother was a really smart woman. She was an Ivy League graduate, and when she has this kid that has this severe disability, she says, well, we're gonna figure out how to deal with that. And one of her great mentors was her mom, who from a very early age said, well, if her brain can't learn language in the normal sort of way, let's see if we can use neuroplasticity to rewire her brain to enable her to acquire language. So Temple's mom, as her mentor, really worked with her intensely, and in exactly the way we talked about neuroplasticity working in the last couple of talks. She did this sustained, repeated, intense training of her brain to be able to get things like speech. And she got a speech therapist in who was an expert. The nanny helped a good bit with that. And they were spending 20 hours a week of kind of intense language training with Temple Grandin. A little kid like that can't really work more than about 30 minutes at a time. So it was all these little 30-minute sessions through the week, adding up to about 20 hours a week over several years. And they rewired Temple's brain to be able to make her functional in terms of speech and in terms of language, in terms of reading, she was perfectly smart in many ways, but these little deficiencies, they found ways to do workarounds and to rewire her brain to be able to do them. And that then enabled Temple to be able to go to school and to be able to function fairly well. So this is, there are many different levels of the autistic spectrum. And some people are very, very severely disabled, and some people it's not bad at all. Temple Grandin would have been very severely disabled, might never have gotten any language, might have always been silent. If it had not been for this intensive neuroplasticity that was really initiated by and managed by her mentor, her mother. So that's one aspect of her autism. So she's going to school, and as you might imagine, oh my God, she had a horrible time in school. Not so much with the academic side of it, which she could handle, but the social side of it was very, very difficult because she's different. And the kids are awful to her. She goes to a very Tony private school, so they're making accommodations for her, but it's still really, really rough to go to that school. Now, another characteristic of autistic people is, as Temple Grandin said, she has no emotional intuition. So again, it's the part of the brain that just we take for granted. It registers other people's reaction, the look on their face, or their body language, and we know how to react in a social sense. Are they rejecting me? Are they, embracing me? What's happening in terms of my emotional interaction with other people? And Temple Grandin said, I just didn't get those messages. They just didn't get communicated. So she had to do a workaround on that too. And she would categorize people's behavior. And then she would logically think through, well, what does that mean about the kind of behavior I need to do in response? So if someone backed off from her, she thought, oh, maybe what I'm doing is bothering them, and that's a kind of rejection of that behavior. So then what I need to do is back off a little bit too. But it had to be done logically. It wasn't done emotionally and intuition and via intuition, as most people would do. Now, a person who helped her enormously in that regard was one of her teachers in school. She had a science teacher named Mr. Carlock. And Mr. Carlock understood that the kind of rational, logical part of her brain worked quite well. And he was a science teacher. He thought she had a really good mind for engineering. And she could do that very well, and he felt like this is college material. We can send her to college. She can maybe be in engineering or some area of science, and she could handle that perfectly well. But he could see in his class, man, these kids are so mean to her, and she's just not able to interact with them positively. So he was one of the people who helped her understand, yeah, I can logically think through the reaction I'm seeing from those people, and then I can logically think through how I should behave in response to that. So again, she rewires her brain to use the parts that she's good at and to work around the parts where she has some kind of deficiency. And for her whole life, she was incredibly indebted to this wonderful mentor, a teacher in high school named Mr. Carlock, who, yeah, he taught her science, and he got her interested in science, but also he helped her interact with the students, and he helped the students understand, because he understood the science of the brain, he helped the other students understand this is what Temple's dealing with. Now, get over your kind of emotional reaction there and help her make a positive interaction with you. So a second kind of really amazing mentor helping her with this neuroplasticity. Then a third mentor was her Aunt Burkeen. Her Aunt Burkeen was her mother's sister. She lived on a ranch in Arizona. And her Aunt Burkeen said, I love this kid. I would like to have more interaction with her. Maybe she could come and spend a month or two in the summer on the ranch here in Arizona. And it would be a change of scenery for her, and I think she could enjoy it. Well, her mom was real concerned about that. Her mom's very protective of Temple, and but finally her Aunt Burkeen convinced her mom to let her go out to Arizona every summer and interact with this completely different environment of the ranch. And on the ranch, she's not as structured, and as we're really kind of learning to overcome some of these brain deficiencies through neuroplasticity. Her Aunt Burkeen's a lot more relaxed about it. But one thing her Aunt Burkeen does is she lets her understand the ranch and the animals, and especially the cows. And wow, Temple Grandin totally related to these cows. She realized that they are prey species. They're skittish. They're nervous. They're always reacting to distracting things in the environment. And she saw a parallel to what she felt when things in the environment were irregular or upsetting. She got kind of skittish, and she could kind of see the behavior of the cattle as being parallel to her behavior. Also, one of the characteristics, because of this auditory problem that comes with autism, she was she had very negative reaction to jolting sounds. So she realized the cows were the same way. If somebody had a kind of whistle or a loud, abrupt sound, it really scared the cows. And she could totally relate to them in that way. So she began to see this kind of connection of her and the cows. And there was one particular thing the wranglers did with the cows that was interesting to her. There was a device, and I grew up in a rural area and we had cattle, and I can remember this kind of device. It's a kind of X-shaped metal thing like this, where you load the cows into the kind of cup of the top of that, and then you squeeze it together like that and kind of have the cow clamped between these two sides that are metal bars. And you use that to kind of capture them when you need to do something like give them inoculations, or you need to drench them, give them medicine through their mouth. When you castrate a calf, you put them in this squeeze machine. And she realized that it not only controlled the cattle, but it also seemed to really calm them down. When you pressed against their sides like that, it calmed them down. And she herself, she got in the squeeze machine and let the wranglers put her in that machine, and it calmed her down. And so when she was at Aunt Burkeen, she made herself a a personal squeeze machine that she could put in her bedroom and that she could use when she got kind of nervous or skittish to calm her down. And Aunt Burkeen was the kind of woman who said, yeah, cool, explore that. See what you can do. If that helps, yeah, whatever. A little looser attitude maybe than her mom, who was trying to make her normal. And of course, it's not normal to have a squeeze machine. But Aunt Burkeen encouraged that. So it was really Aunt Burkeen as a mentor who loved Temple and let her explore this interest in cattle, let her explore this interest in a way, she was being a little engineer making this squeeze machine, and explore other ways to deal with some of the issues that her autism brought up. So Aunt Burkeen's a third kind of wonderful mentor. So her mom, Mr. Carlock, Aunt Burkeen, all of these are really great mentors for Temple Grandin. So far, we've figured out how Temple Grandin got from being this severely disabled autistic kid to being perfectly functional, to being able to actually socially interact with people, to be able to find a kind of interest that she has and begin to explore it at her Aunt Burkeen's ranch. But wait, how does this woman get to be a really creative person? And she did end up being an amazingly creative person. And especially when the frontal cortex, which is where we normally think of creativity occurring, is exactly where some of this disability lies. So she described her frontal cortex as it's like a company where all the departments are functioning fine, but there's no intercommunication between any of the departments. So you can't get anything done because there's no intercommunication. The accounting department is not talking to the management department or the sales department. And so there's confusion. She also describes her brain as sort of like a series of floors in an office building, but no elevator connecting those floors. So that it's not like she couldn't have really cool thoughts, but she couldn't put them together. She couldn't conceptualize things. So that was a challenge she had with her frontal lobe. She went to Colorado State University for college. She majored in animal husbandry because of her love of animals and of cows in particular. And she was interested in large animals, horses and cows. You can imagine, oh my God, this is a really male-dominated field. And hard enough because she's a woman, but then in addition to that, she's an autistic woman. She had a lot of hurdles to overcome in the university. She went on, got her PhD, and she's doing research. And in order to do research, she's going out to these animal operations, these CAFOs, concentrated agricultural facilities, and the wranglers, the cattle wranglers, they just don't accept her. And she's like thrown off of a lot of these places because she rankles them. But she's trying to find a way to take all this bits of information she can glean about cattle behavior and figure out a better way to do that wrangler's job and figure out a better way to process cattle. And that's where she's looking to be creative. And she's using the brain capability she has. All those individual departments are doing fine. Can she find a way to connect them using a different part of her brain than the frontal lobe, a more logical part of the brain, to then allow her to do creative work? And remarkably, she really did that. And she did it in a powerful way. Now, the takeaway for me, for us, I think, out of this, if Temple Grandin can take her brain, which was a challenging brain for sure, and she could use neuroplasticity to get the kind of skills she needed to be a creative person, holy moly, I mean, all of us who have a much more normal brain, can't we use those same capabilities of neuroplasticity to train our brains to do the kind of creative thinking we want them to do? And I totally believe that's possible. And for me, Temple Grandin is just incredibly inspirational as someone who lets us see the power of neuroplasticity to shape our brain in a really creative way. So in the next talk, we're going to extend this discussion of Temple Grandin and really look at exactly what she did to innovate and to invent new ways of dealing with cattle, which was her area of expertise. Okay, see ya.